Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Managerial Accounting. Purpose of this is there's going to be two little mini lectures. So what I'll do a separate mini lecture on the multiple choice part of the exam, and then I'll do another one on the problem part of the exam, the take-home part of the exam. So let's start with the multiple choice. And those of you who would have done the little adaptive exercises that I had strongly recommended had a real advantage here. And if you chose not to do that, you chose to do that at your peril. The multiple choice questions, there were 20 of them. There was supposed to be 30 of them. So I did 29 by mistake. So I gave you all an extra 3 points. I didn't think anyone would mind. So the maximum you could have gotten there was 60 points. So there were, in theory, 30, actually 29, each worth 2 points apiece. So let's talk about each one. And if there's computations involved, I'll actually show you the computations, although most of these are more conceptual nature. And this is why at the back of each chapter, what I strongly recommended you do was to look at all those different definitions at the back of each chapter and make sure you had mastered those, because a lot of these were definitional. Primary goal of managerial accounting, these go in chronological order. So we go chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. So starting with chapter 1, the primary goal of managerial accounting is to provide information that is useful to managers. So that correct answer there is C. Which of the following would most likely be considered an indirect material by a manufacturer? So steel, fabric, and lumber, those are all materials that make their way directly and directly traceable to the product. So the one that would be indirect would be glue. Glue is a classic example of an indirect material. 3, cost of goods manufactured. Cost of goods manufactured is normally beginning work in process plus total manufacturing costs incurred during the period minus the ending work in process inventory. So the order is a little bit different there, but the correct answer there is D. And you would have seen that on the first question in the take-home part of the exam. Number 4, which of the following is a period cost for Bartell Corporation, a bicycle manufacturer? Period costs are those costs that are expensed in the period. They do not become part of the cost of the product. Therefore, they don't end up being in inventory. So the one that's clearly a period cost would be, I can identify this, would be accountant salaries. So the answer there is D. An example of a period cost, advertising is another classic example of a period cost. Indirect materials, that's overhead. Depreciation of factory equipment, that's overhead. Property taxes on plant facilities, that's all overhead. Those all become part of the cost of the product. The one that would be a period cost would be advertising expense. Number 6, conversion costs, given the following data. Conversion costs are direct labor plus overhead. And of the numbers given there, direct labor was 196.3 and overhead was 187.9. So that gives us 384.2. With multiple choice, whenever there's computations, do the computation first and then go looking for the right answer. So any case where there are computations, I would have highlighted those in yellow as well. So the correct answer there is D. Number 7, which of the following is an indirect cost for a producer of bar stools for restaurants? So wages, wood and steel, leather used for seat cushions, those would all be direct cost. The one that would be indirect would be factory supervisor's salary. That would be an example of overhead. So the correct answer there is B as in boy. Number 8, prime costs. By definition, prime costs are direct material and right. So those first 8 questions had to do with chapter 1. Now getting into chapter 2, journalizing the entry for indirect labor incurred. So when we have indirect labor incurred, this was very similar to the take-home part of the exam question number 2. For indirect costs, we debit factory overheads. The answer there is A. Which of the following is typically used by companies that make custom products? If you make custom products, you use job order costing. Process costing would be used for if you're making stuff that's not distinguishable from one another. Hybrid costing is when you use a combination of two, and operations costing doesn't really have any meaning. So the best answer there is A. Number 11, journalizing the entries for a job shipped and customers billed would include a credit to. So there are 2 entries here. So when you when you reduce the finished goods by debiting cost of goods sold and crediting finished goods, that would be the entry to record the cost of the sale. And then you'd also have the revenue as well, which would be a debit to, say, accounts receivable and sales. So the correct answer there is C. You would definitely have a credit to finished goods when you ship goods out. Number 12, a manufacturer of which the following products would normally most likely use job order costing. Remember, job order costing, the products are distinguishable from one another. And so the one that is the most distinguishable from one another would be a graduation invitation, because you're inviting people to a particular graduation, as opposed to cell phones, highlighter pens, and recliners, where you're basically manufacturing a whole bunch of the same unit at once, not distinguishable from one another. So graduation invitation would be the one that would be job order costing. 13, in job order costing, the journal entry to the direct materials, when you put a unit into production, would be debit work in process and credit materials. So again, think of the right answer first in terms of the journal entry, then go looking for it. So the answer is A. Let me just double check something here. Bear with me a second. I want to make sure I'm recording. Yes, I am recording. Okay, number 14. The salary of the director of internal auditing, that would be an administrative expense. Internal auditing is important, but it's not part of the overhead that makes its way into the product, whereas product cost for material and labor, these would all be director of the internal auditing would be classified as administrative expense. It's not a salary expense, it's administrative expense, so it's D. Okay, so C is a period cost as well, but it's not. It doesn't have to do with the director of internal auditing. Directors of internal auditing don't spend time selling. 15, the document authorizing the issuance of materials from the storeroom. That would be a materials requisition form. So the answer there is A. 16, the account of factory overhead cost incurred. Remember the little T account I put on the board several times for a factory overhead. You have a debit for the cost incurred, and you have a credit for the factory overhead applied. So the amount of factory overhead incurred exceeds the amount that it's applied. That means you're going to have a debit balance in factory overhead, and that's going to be under applied overhead. So when you get rid of that expense at the end of the period, that's going to become additional cost of goods sold. So the answer there is A. Okay, another computational one here. The following production data were taken from the records for this company at the end of June, and it says the number of conversion equivalent units in production at June 30th, the finishing department, assuming that the first in, first out. So the end of the period at the end of June, you have 6,000 units, and they are 60% complete. So with regard to conversion cost, it would be 60% of 7,000, which gives you 4,200. Okay, 18 is a little bit more involved. So we have the department with 20, they give us all the information there, and it says the equivalent units of production used to compute the conversion cost on the production report for the department W, assuming the company uses FISO. Okay, so they want conversion costs. So you had 2,400 units, and they were 1/3 complete at the beginning of the period, which means 2/3 of the work must have been done this period. And then you want the number of units that were completed. So you had 16,000 units that were transferred out. They're using FIFO. So the 16 that were transferred out, 2,400 of those came out of the beginning work in process inventory. So as far as what was started and completed in this period would be 16,000 minus 2,400. And then you had 1,800 units that were 1/2 complete. So you take 1,800 and you multiply by 1/2. So you can do the computations yourself if you haven't already, and the answer comes out to be 16,100, which the answer there is A. Number 19, the manufacture of 10,000 units of product, direct materials costs were 165, direct labor incurred was 105, and applied factory overhead was 53. Total conversion cost, remember conversion cost is labor plus overhead. So you had labor of 105 and you had overhead of 53, so it's 158. So the answer there is B. Number 20, In process costing, the amount of work in process inventory is valued by allocating, the answer there is B, allocating department costs between completed and partially completed units. So completed and partially completed. So the answer there is B. 21, this is computational as well. You had 2,400 units, 1/3 complete. At the beginning of the period, 16,000 units were transferred to Department X. 1,800 units were 1/2 complete at the end of the period. Assume the completion rates apply to direct materials and conversion costs. The number of units to be assigned cost. So to be assigned. So that's the total number of units we have to account for. So you had the 2,400 units in the beginning inventory, and then to get started and completed, it's 16,000 minus the 2,400. And then you had 1,800 units that were left over at the end of the period in work in process. So the total number you have to account for is 17,800. They didn't ask for equivalent units of material and equivalent units for conversion costs. You would have gotten a different answer there. They just said the total number of units to be assigned cost. So the answer there, and you can see the math here, is 17,800. Which of the following would most likely use job order costing? And remember, job order costing is when each job is different. So, and each product is different than the product next to it. So paper manufacturer, flour mill, gasoline refinery, those would all be process costing. The one that would use job order costing would be a movie studio. A. Process costing would be appropriate for, again, you got to ask yourself, are each of the products the same? Or is each product unique? So jet planes, catering business, custom cabinet builder, keyword there is custom. Those are all unique products. So the one that would use process costing would be a natural gas refinery A. 24, which of the following is uncharacteristic? So this is not likely to happen in process costing, and costs are accumulated by the job would be the one that is not used in process costing. All those other things, several works in process accounts are used, manufacturing costs are grouped, perpetual inventory system is maintained, work in process and finished goods. So the one that would be uncharacteristic of process costing would be C. 25, another computational one here. So we have a company that makes two similar products. So regular widgets and deluxe widgets, the total factory overhead budget is 675,000, and with 300,000 direct labor hours. So you got to get the overhead rate per direct labor hour is $2.25. So that's where I get my 225, looking in yellow there, and the question is, using the single plant-wide overhead rate rounded to the nearest cent, with an allocation base of direct labor hours, the factory overhead that Challenger would allocate to deluxe widgets if budgeted production for the period for widgets is 58,000, and it takes 2 hours, it takes 3 hours. Deluxe widget production requires 3 direct labor hours. So you get the rate per hour of 225, you've got 58,000 units, and the deluxe widgets take 3 hours. So $2.25 times 58 times 3 gives you 391,500. Again, do the computation first and go looking for the number. So the answer is A. We have factory overhead for the year of 13,500,000 and budgeted direct labor hours for the year at 10,000. So our overhead rate per hour is 135. The actual direct labor hours for the month was 35,000. So to get the overhead applied, you take the actual hours that they incurred, which was 350,000, times the overhead rate of 350,000 times $1.35 gives us 472.5. And the answer there is C. Which of the following are actual factory overhead allocation methods? So plant-wide, multiple production departments, and activity-based. I can still see my snow blowers, I say snow blowers, my riding mowers and my snowmobiles as the Class D example there when we came out with the overhead allocated under each scenario, and these were the 3 different scenarios. So we allocated single rate, multiple production rate, and activity-based. So the answer is A. 28, which of the following is a reason banks use activity-based costing? Well, banks want to determine the amounts to be charged, and they also want to get the profitability of the services. So that's 28. There is no 29, though I gave you all credit for it, as if there was. And then the last one here, if selling administrative expenses are allocated to different products for decision-making, they should be recorded in the financial statements as selling and administrative expenses are period costs. They're not part of the cost of goods manufactured. They're not a factory overhead cost. They're not part of cost of goods sold. Regardless of how you allocate them, they are period costs. Okay, so that's the answer there is C. So when you look at the multiple choice part of your exam, you take basically what I did is I took 30, which was the total numbers that I had planned to have in there. I subtracted out the number you got wrong. That gave me a number, and I multiplied that by 2. That would have given you your score. So the maximum you could have gotten on the multiple choice would have been 60 points. And then each of the problems was worth 10. So you'll see a grading system there where I show you multiple choice grade, followed by the number of points that you got on each of the 4 problems. And we'll go over the 4 problems in a separate video, which I will send you shortly. So I hope you found that review useful, and we will see you in class tomorrow. Be well, everybody. Good evening. Bye-bye. Hasta luego, au revoir, adios.